Divine Oracle, Unwritten Words Behind My Novel. The Historical Blueprint of a Great Argead Saga, Alexine. Volume 1, Telesius, The War Dance. By Macaulay Naki. Audio essay. Episode 4, Genesis of Slander, Athenian Hostility, and Macedonian History. Welcome back to Divine Oracle, Unwritten Words Behind My Novel. I am Macaulay Naki. The negative, deeply distorted, and frequently fabricated narratives surrounding King Philip II and Queen Olympias did not magically appear centuries after their deaths. The poisonous foundation of this historical fiction was poured during Philip's actual lifetime, engineered by his most vicious, articulate political rivals, the ancient Athenian orators. The source of hostility, political warfare. The primary source of the anti-Macedonian narrative came from Athenian rhetoricians whose spoken and written words were systematically designed to act as immediate, aggressive political propaganda. The most famous, unrelenting critic was the Athenian statesman Demosthenes, living from 384 to 322 BCE. He authored a savage series of political speeches, known to history as the Philippics, explicitly designed to terrorize and rally the Athenian populace into launching an all-out military campaign against Philip. These speeches were never intended to serve as objective, sober historical records. They were weaponized character assassinations engineered to portray Philip as a hopeless drunkard and unprincipled tyrant and a primitive barbarian whose absolute rule was culturally and morally inferior to Athenian democracy. This elite rhetoric established a highly effective hostile framework. It aggressively argued that the Macedonians were morally bankrupt and that their rapid geopolitical success was entirely illegitimate. This ancient hate speech became the structural ideological basis that future historians would uncritically rely upon to build their own narratives. The historical source vacuum crucially, the early formative lives of Philip and Polixena Olympias were almost completely unknown to these southern orators. In antiquity, the unwritten preeminence rule dictated that detailed history was only recorded about active rulers and pivotal, world-changing state events. Before Philip unexpectedly seized the throne in 359 BCE, neither he nor the rewrote Princess Olympias were considered politically or structurally significant enough to merit any detailed coverage by external scribes. Their younger years were a total blank space, completely unrecorded by anyone outside the immediate insular court of Pella. This absolute lack of a verifiable contemporary record gave later writers the unchecked creative freedom to fabricate their personalities, vices, and private interactions without any fear of immediate historical contradiction. The fabrication, turning slander into fiction. The specific sensationalized details that dominate modern media, the pathological jealousy, the ecstatic snake handling, and the theatrical assassination dramas, were recorded centuries later by writers who built directly upon that original Athenian hostility. Roman-era historians, drawing heavily from the lost, romanicized texts of Clearchus writing 300 to 400 years after the facts, took the raw political slander of Demosthenes and transformed it into highly sensationalized cinematic narratives. They took an oratorical insult, such as calling Philip a crude drunk, and expanded it into an elaborate, sexually charged tragedy centering on the assassin Pausanias. This massive fabrication functioned as a sophisticated form of historical revenge. It allowed defeated Greek intellectuals to assert a comforting moral and cultural superiority over their Macedonian conquerors. By portraying the Argead dynasty as emotionally corrupt, wildly volatile, and fundamentally unfit for rule, they managed to soothe the long-lasting, deep-seated historical shame of having been utterly subjugated by the North. Fabricating shame, the historian's revenge. The core reason why historians living 4 centuries after Alexander's death fabricated wild tales of madness, and royal degeneracy is rooted in deep-seated political and ethnic animosity. The later historians, many of whom were Greek intellectuals native to city-states like Athens, represented a proud cultural heritage that had been decisively conquered and politically neutralized by the Macedonian phalanx. Many southern Greeks viewed the Macedonians as semi-barbarians who spoke a crude regional dialect and lacked true, sophisticated Hellenic culture. While Philip and Alexander desperately utilized their wealth to prove their Hellenic credentials, their total military success meant the definitive end of the democratic and civic autonomy of the classic city-states. The Macedonians completely destroyed Thebes, conquered Athens, and permanently imposed Philip as hegemon and supreme commander of Greece. For centuries, Greek intellectuals harbored an intense, suffocating shame over being ruled by these northern outsiders. These later historians weaponized their writing as a tool of retroactive vengeance, deliberately tearing down the moral character of the conquerors, demolishing the dynasty. The explicit purpose of these fabricated narratives was to diminish the immense Argead legacy by replacing military and strategic genius with severe moral corruption. King Philip II was systematically reduced from the brilliant strategic founder of an empire to a heavy-drinking victim, slaughtered over petty, localized sexual jealousy. This convenient narrative focus completely ignored the profound, unbreakable political stability he spent his life building. Olympias, as a foreign queen from Epirus, became the ultimate target for slanders rooted in deep sexist arrogance. She was transformed by the texts into a witchy, chaotic villain who polluted a noble Greek line with foreign blood, dark magic, and hereditary madness. This reinforced the patriarchal ancient belief that female political power inevitably leads to catastrophic ruin. Alexander the Great was subsequently portrayed as a man whose spectacular conquests were ultimately ruined by personal vice, intense paranoia, excessive drinking, oriental despotism, and an unnatural lust for eunuchs like Bagos. This allowed defeated intellectuals to argue that the empire fractured not because Macedonia was strategically or militarily superior, but because the royal dynasty itself was morally hollow from the start. Writers like Clitarchus knew that these sensational theatrical details were infinitely more entertaining and vastly easier to sell than a sober, dry analysis of phalanx maneuvers, supply lines, and silver mining policies. This literary bias allowed them to create a highly marketable, moralistic spectacle, effectively undermining the true strategic accomplishments of the Macedonian Empire by demolishing the human integrity of its core family. The ultimate goal was to laugh at the conqueror's demise by imagining them utterly consumed by their own unbridled vices. The soap opera of slander, demolishing Macedon's moral authority. The highly detailed, scandalous account of Philip II's assassination, centering on a volatile rivalry between General Attalus and two men named Pausanias, functions as a political cheap soap opera, utilizing sexual humiliation as its primary weapon. The classic plot hinges on Attalus's consuming jealousy of Philip II's private life. The historical gossip hints strongly that the relationship between Attalus and the younger Pausanias was an intimate patron-lover bond. When the younger Pausanias shifted his affections directly to King Philip and subsequently committed suicide after being publicly shamed by the elder Pausanias, Attalus's emotional wound was immense. Attalus's ensuing actions, brutally intoxicating and gang-raping the elder Pausanias of Orestis, who was also Philip's former lover, were driven by a deep-seated desire to degrade those whom the king had chosen. This was a savage way to express an unsatisfactory jealousy toward the king himself, a sovereign who possessed the absolute power, the royal wives, and the young companions that Attalus could only dream of controlling. Fabricating symmetry, Attalus and Olympias. The most damning evidence of this systematic propaganda is the identical, symmetrical nature of the slander directed at Alexander's two greatest political threats. The ancient writers deliberately crafted General Attalus as a manic, jealous, and hyper-manipulative general, obsessed with eliminating Alexander from the succession. They simultaneously branded Olympias as an equally jealous, volatile, and witchy queen operating from the shadows. By making both the most powerful male military rival and the most powerful female ally appear completely unhinged and driven by blind emotion. The Athenian fiction successfully argued that the entire Macedonian Empire was founded on a bedrock of moral degeneracy, uncontrollable vice, and severe family dysfunction. The Athenian writers, struggling to survive the crushing shame of being conquered, could not tolerate the reality that northern barbarians had built the world's greatest empire through superior intellectual strategy. They demolished this achievement by reducing the conquerors' lives to petty, scandalous sexual feuds, upholding the patriarchal ideal that when powerful men are consumed by emotion, or when foreign women are permitted public authority, systemic disaster inevitably follows. The entire conspiracy narrative is a highly theatrical exercise by later Greeks to mock, humiliate, and mentally dismantle the empire that militarily defeated them on the field of battle. The success of slander. Why the soap opera endured. The sensationalized narratives surrounding the Macedonian royal family thrived because they provided the ultimate emotional release and ideological justification for a defeated Greek world. The Athenian audience consumed these lurid tales for the exact same reason modern audiences flock to dramatic, ridiculous reality narratives. They offer a powerful, comforting form of psychological escapism. The unbearable reality of the 4th century BCE was that Athens and the great city-states had been completely outmaneuvered by a nation they considered completely inferior. This failure was a profound, unanswerable blow to their collective pride. The sensationalized accounts allowed the audience to escape this reality. If Philip was killed not by a vast, organized political conspiracy, but by a petty, localized love feud, and if Alexander's mother was a raving, unhinged witch, then Macedon's empire was built on a foundation of moral corruption, not superior military geometry. This narrative allowed the Athenians to safely laugh at their conquerors and validate their internal belief that the Macedonians were inherently flawed. The historians replaced complex, multifaceted geopolitical reality with a simple, easily digestible moral catastrophe. The conflict was reduced to the easily understood dynamics of jealousy, betrayal, and domestic chaos, requiring zero intellectual effort from the reader. The fabrication successfully created perfect, theatrical villains in Attalus, the embodiment of jealous, drunken masculinity, and Olympias, the embodiment of terrifying, volatile femininity. By presenting both the male and female sources of Macedonian power as morally bankrupt, the narrative successfully demolished the integrity of the entire Argead dynasty. The enduring vengeance, why Athenian slander still succeeds. The fictionalized Macedonian narrative maintains its global popularity today because it taps into primal psychological needs that completely transcend time and culture. The success of these ancient fabrications proves that the mentality of the ancient slanderer, the impulse to diminish a perceived superior through moral scandal, is still powerfully alive in modern storytelling. The historical distortions about Philip, Olympias, and Alexander succeed globally because they satisfy an enduring human demand for psychological validation. If Alexander the Great, the man who conquered the known world, was ultimately brought down by witchy mothers, sexual jealousy, and his own emotional instability, then his success was not due to superior strategy, but to blind luck, which was eventually negated by his moral flaws. This allows an audience, whether ancient Athenians or modern readers, to feel instantly superior to the historical conqueror. Storytellers, whether ancient or modern, know that sexual scandal and familial betrayal are the most powerful narrative engines in existence. The story of Attalus orchestrating a revenge rape, or Alexander's mother murdering a rival wife and child, is infinitely more compelling to a mass audience than a detailed discussion of ancient military logistics, currency inflation, or grain supply routes. These sensationalized plots provide the high drama, escapism, and emotional intensity that appeal to a mass market across all civilizations. The neglected mind, bias in modern mediums. The ancient Athenian neglected mind is still succeeding in our modern era. The biases established 4 centuries after Alexander's death are carried directly forward through our contemporary mediums. Many modern writers and creators, lacking the necessary time, are training for rigorous source criticism, default to the most familiar and dramatic narratives, the sensationalized pages of Plutarch or Curtius Rufus, simply because they offer a ready-made, highly theatrical story structure. The image of Olympias as a crazy queen is an easier, far more marketable trope to sell than depicting a complex, brilliant geopolitical strategist navigating a hostile court. Whether it is a television show, a film, or a popular biography, modern audiences prefer the comfortable theme that great power breeds absolute moral corruption. The fictionalized Macedonian collapse provides a neat, satisfying moral lesson. The conquerors were ultimately defeated by their own internal, personal sins, validating the secular belief that ethical weakness will eventually undermine geopolitical success. The lasting legacy of the Athenian soap opera is that it successfully turned a historical, strategic defeat into a permanent cultural and moral victory. A psychological triumph of the pen that continues to distort our understanding of the ancient world to this very day. Tune in for our next daily drop tomorrow as we continue to dissect the bloodlines of antiquity. Alexine, a great Argead saga. Volume 1, Telesius, the War Dance. Unearth the ultimate historical drama. We are releasing a brand new episode every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused, 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, the perfect daily plunge into the ancient world. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Talesius playlist. Subscribe to follow the rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below. Was Olympias's political violence an act of savage madness, or a cold, calculated defense of the Argead throne? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.